Hello and welcome to the Jessie James Beads Facebook page. It is the 19th of August, it's 4 PM for you Eastern Standard Time, 9 PM over here in the United Kingdom. I hope you're having a beautiful day no matter what it is you've been getting up to, and I want to share a tutorial for you today which is something of an ensemble piece. So there's lots of different techniques in the tutorial today which you can kind of pick and choose from which ones you like, which ones you want to repeat, if any of them. So what I'd like to do now, just while we're gathering people to come and join us at the live, is I'm going to show you, and this is a brand new setup to me today. I've had to learn things today technologically, and that's always a bit sketchy if you're me. So let's just see if we can get a little bit more light on there without too much shadow. That's the project that we're going to look at today, the different techniques to create those pieces. And we're going to be working with the Ice Cream Mini Bead Mix in Mint Chocolate Chip. Such a beautiful and fresh collection of beads. And I've also chosen to use some wire. Now the wires I'm using today are in a whole bunch of different numbers. I've got 18 gauge, I've got 22, I've got 20 and 26 gauge. It's all round wire. No special profile is needed. Now there will be a couple of different segments to the demo which I will take you through as we go forwards. So you can see I'm down here, hello, just shoved in the corner. So basically this is brand new technology for me today, and I do hope that I won't let you down, and I do hope that the technology won't let you down. So, I'd like to just chat very, very briefly about the beads before we kick off. I have got a whole pot worth left of beads. All of these are still in the pot, which I always like to see because it means I've got so many other things I can be making. So what we're looking at today is a floral bar necklace, and I've chosen to add in some of the chain reaction up at the side here. You could put in any chain that you like in any colourway, or you can go your own way. You can put braided fabrics in, or some of the fairy silks, whatever you fancy. The main feature that we're looking at is the segment from here to here. I really like it with this chain, and I've popped the details for all of the component parts into the video description, so if it is something that you wanted to recreate, then you can have a quick look at that. So let's move you to the overhead. And what we're going to do is do each of these individual pieces part by part. So the first thing that I'm going to start off with is the basis of the design, and that's this little bar that's almost hidden now by all of the component pieces over the top, but it does form the basis of the tutorial. So what I need to do is just move this up and out of the way, and we will bring that back as and when we need it. I'm going to show you what we're going to create, and then I'm going to show you how to create it. So this is the basis, this is the nuts and bolts of it, and this is what everything is going to be attached into. Now you can use heavier gauge wire than I'm using if you wish to. This really is enough it's enough to be strong enough, and it's not so much that it's not too heavy on the neckline. So you can obviously play with that design to your heart's content. So to create a piece like this, we will need to take two pieces of the 18 gauge wire, and they are approximately 10 inches in length. So for you today, what I've done is I've just grabbed a couple of dinky tiny pieces. To create this piece in question, each of those segments is 10 inches in length, and it's the 18 gauge. I'm just going to demonstrate with some slightly shorter pieces, otherwise we will be here all night watching just the one thing. So I find the easiest way is just to simply warm the section of wire and pop a little bit of a curvature in it. Now what I've done here, just so that it sits nicely on the neckline, is one is ever so slightly more deeply curved than the other. You can play around with that to your heart's content. So if you imagine that these are the 10 inches in length, it's slightly closer together at the ends and just a little bit flared in that centre. Now I'm going to be working from my reel of 26 gauge wire. I'm just going to pop the reel out of shot, and I'm going to take either the lower or the upper of those two, remembering these are 10-inch bars in reality. And what I will do is, rather than winding 3 times on either side, at the beginning I'm going to wind 5 times round. And the reason for that is that I want to get a really good grip, because this is structural and it will enable your jewellery to be much more long living, basically. So I'm just going to trim that away, and I've given that 5 wraps to begin with, always policing those little bits of wire so they don't end up on the floor. And I'm just going to scooch that wire around so it's a really nice firm connection on that first section. So we're going to be doing a figure of 8 weave on this section. So the finer gauge wire has come around my frame wire, and it's coming upwards now from underneath over the second bar, like so. Now, in order for this to work for me, I'm actually going to flip this over because I'm right dominant, so I tend to weave towards the right. So the wire has come underneath like so, and I'm just going to be working in this slightly curved fashion, remembering that these in reality are 10-inch bars of wire. So from underneath over the top of the opposite frame. These are my 2 frame wires, and I just want this to be quite close together at the beginning. And what I shall do is I shall wrap 3 times around the bar that is closest to me at the moment, draw the tail of the wire up between those 2 main bars, and I've just wrapped 3 times opposite to where I started. I'm going to move my hand along just a little bit and pinch those 2 segments that I've wired together. Take the finer gauge wire over the top, so we're always switching. We're coming up the middle each time, so that's 1 and 2 and 3. Wrap that around, draw the finer gauge wire up the centre, and each time I complete 3 wraps on each of those bars, what I should do is just tighten those up. You can use a pair of pliers or you can use your nails, whichever makes you happier. So again, I'm going to just keep this fairly open, and the reason we're doing an open weave like so rather than a compressed tight weave is that we'll be sewing our component parts onto this framework as we create them, or if you prefer at the end of the tutorial, whichever makes you happiest. So it's just a case of forwards and backwards until you've filled up the middle 5 or so inches of your 10 inches of wire. So I'm just going to flare that out in the centre a bit. You don't have to do that, it could be exactly the same dimension all the way along. There's just a nice aesthetic to it. So all we're doing, as I say, wrapping 3 times on each side, drawing the tail of the wire up the centre, diagonally crossing between the 2 of them. If I give that a little move around, you should be able to see that copper wire. You can use whatever colour you want, but I really love working with copper. So we're just going to go back and forth until we've finished the middle 5 inches. So I'm just going to take the little demonstration piece out of the way, get my wire to one side and bring this a little bit further down. So what I've done on the one side is created quite an open coil. Now you can be really fanciful with this, you can make it as open or as tight as you'd like to. So I'm just going to flip this over and match on the other side. One thing I would say is I took a second to make sure that my back and forth, or my figure of 8 weaving, was centralised, and that these 2 wires on either end were around about the same length. That just means that when I put the coil in at the bottom, they're going to be very, very similar in size. So gripping quite close to the top of those round nose pliers now, just to bring that around and start the coil, like so. You can open and close those if you need to. Once you get that coil going, you can switch to your bent chain nose or standard chain nose pliers. And what I think I will do to match the other side is do 2 complete circuits that are closed up. So we're going to match the other side before opening out into a much more elaborate coil. So there's a little bit of airspace now. And it just takes a little bit of practice. One of the things that you can do if you ever have offcuts from your wire projects and you struggle with controlling a coil like so, is just use those little offcuts to practice with the coils. And then when you come to make them and you need them to be under a greater element of control, so you're trying to match them, you can even pinch that and close it up with your fingers. A little bit of grip strength goes a long way if you can muster that. So underneath, on the underside, and you can see I've curved this so it's a bit like a very, very gentle smile. At the top, what I will do is I'll show you how to create a wrapped loop on one side, and I'll show you how you could add in a length of chain. Now unfortunately I don't have another piece of chain with me, but I will show you now. So above where we've created that opening coil, I'm going to turn a right angle bend, so that would be coming up in effect towards the neckline. Going to grab hold of those round nose pliers again and create a circular form on the end of that upper of the two bars, and I'm just going to show you the circular form and then show you at an angle so you can see there's a really large gap in there. Now if I just grab a piece of scrap wire, which I had a moment ago, create a very rough circle like so, imagining that this is the last loop of whatever chain you're going to use to extend away. What you will do is slide that last loop into the centre of the open loop that we've just created. Like so. And then to close that up, what I'm going to do is remove this because I will add later with a jump ring. If I want to reuse this, you can always add with a jump ring. You don't have to do a scary wrapped loop if you don't want to, with the chain in position. But I'll just close that loop down. You'd support that shape like so to make sure that you're not squashing anywhere the wires cross over or where the chain comes up. And I'll just draw that around one time like so and bring that back up towards the neckline. Give that a bit of a squeeze, and then we have an opportunity here to add another coil in, and I quite like the dynamic of having an open coil at the bottom and then a more closed coil up at the top. So I will just give that a bit of a warm through before I bring in again those round nose pliers like so and just start twisting that up into a closed coil. So this is really the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of our design, to which we're going to add whichever of these little mini projects you wish to add. So you would do exactly the same on the other end, add in your chain, or simply create a loop through which you can add a jump ring later on, or even a lark's head knot if you're going to use a fabric. So that is our first mini project, which is our open weave main bar. So what I need to do is just pop that up out of the way, bring the main project back into view for a moment. And what we're going to do is work on this little design here. Now if I can bring this up a little bit closer, it's really cute. It's like a 3 flowers joined together on a little vine. And then that vine is wrapped around our main bar. So I'm going to pop this back out of the way so that it doesn't get underfoot, so to speak. And then we will add in our next little section. So for this section, which is, I'm going to call it the Floral Trio, we're going to need 3 of these beautiful sort of pearlescent, almost aqua colour bead caps, and 3 of the bronze coloured faceted rondelle beads that come in the mint chocolate chip box. To begin with, we'll be using our round nose pliers, which is not those. Story of my life. So what I'm going to do is to create a coil like so, which will sit inside that flower bead cap, and I'm going to do that for you twice just to make sure that you're happy with this. Now these are 5-inch lengths of 22 gauge wire. That's approximately 0.6mm gauge if you need the metric variation. So I'm going to start close to the end of my round nose pliers. It's all of the wire I'm using is round wire. I'm utilising raw copper because I like how it feels and I like how it looks. So I'm creating really a very tiny loop in the end to begin with. Just give that a bit of a flick so you can see that colourway. And then you can either use your bent chain nose or your standard chain nose pliers, whichever is better for you. I prefer to work with a bent chain nose. They're really beautiful pliers to work with. So I'm going to open and close and just move that coil around so that we get 2 turns on that loop, 2 turns on that coil rather. And then I'm going to really squeeze that quite firmly. So I've set that coil now. It's not going to come undone. What I will need to do now is hold exactly half of that coil and bring the wire back over the centre of the coil. So it's travelling from the outside across the centre. I'm just going to gently pinch that in by hand so I can see it sits over that central section. Now, going against literally everything I've ever said about wire, I'm going to very, very gently hold the coil with the finer gauge wire coming over the top and turn that upwards. Pull that into a straight line. What we're making here is a handmade head pin effect, and because we gave that coil a really nice firm squeeze before we turned the wire over the centre, it's a good strong thing. It's a nice article to work with. So what we will do now is take the inside, the concave side of that floral cap, and slide that down so that it sits on top of our handmade coiled head pin. Forgot the word then. Then what we shall do is add one of those bronze colour faceted rondelle beads. I think they're bronze colour, they could be almost anything. So I'm going to show you that again, but a little faster. You can work along with or rewind at a later date. So we're starting off by creating a coil. Needs to be quite a tight coil or you cover up too much of your beautiful aqua metallic, almost AB coated, it's pearlescent really. They are really cute little bead caps. So once I've got 2 circuits around that central coil, I'm going to give that a squeeze just on the coiled segment, hold halfway across it and draw that wire so that it sits over the middle. I'm going to push that down by hand and not with the pliers. I don't want to stress it too much. We have a little visitor. Tiny little fly decided to join. So what I'm going to do now is very gently hold that wire that crosses over the top of the double coils we've made and draw that away. Now you can see you can either draw the wire up or you can do what I did, which is to turn your pliers. The point is you end up with a disc style head pin with a nice firm double coil. So again, I'll be adding into the concave side of the aquatoned pearlescent bead cap, and then adding in that bronze tone faceted rondelle. So what I need to do now is bring those 3 items together and just allow them to sit side by side. Now I've somehow managed to cut one of these a little bit shorter than the others, so it will get absorbed into the technique that we're going to use, so don't overly worry if they're not identical sized, because we'll trim them if we need to. So what I shall do is I shall flare one out to one side, one out to the other side, and just give those beads a bit of space up at the top there. And what we're going to do is start twisting this bundle of wires like a key. So if you have grip strength issues, it's almost best to use your weakest hand to do the turning and your strongest hand to do the gripping. Or if you prefer, you could use a pair of pliers, making sure you're not squashing the wires together. So I'm just going to turn these in a clockwise motion. Doesn't really matter as long as they keep going the same way. And I'm going to get those started so that you can see they're starting to bind up. Now because I've cut one of those a little bit too short, that can be just a tiny bit stabby and you don't really want that in the flesh of your thumb. So if that happens, or you just prefer to, what you can do is bring in your any flat facing pliers, so your chain nose flat pliers, bent chain nose pliers, whatever works for you. And I'm just going to keep turning that until I get a firm grip on those turns coming around, so it looks a bit like looks almost machined. So what I will do is I'm going to trim the loose ends away like so and just tidy up the coiling on the end. We haven't done the top part yet, so don't worry about it. That will get tidier in just a moment. So now all those ends are the same length, I can just allow that to tighten up really neatly. I'm not overly stressing it because we don't ever want to put pressure on beads. So what you can see is that it's starting to move up towards those flowers. So once they are a little bit firmer in position, all I'm doing is I'm bending those ever so slightly forwards before I just put one final twist near the top. And this is a very gentle manoeuvre now, so I don't snap the wire and I don't damage the beads. And what we've done is we've created a 3-headed flower design. So what I want to do here is just put a little bit of warmth back into this section that we've just created. So we've basically twisted wire by hand, and I want to have a nice swoosh design coming out from underneath, like so. And what we can do is add this into our main bar. Now you may decide that that's all you want to have on there. It's quite pretty by itself. So for this one, all I would do is I might just allow slightly larger swooshing section. Go by eye, see what makes you happy. I think I'd like it to sit quite high over the main bar section, so I'm going to grip that in position, take that tail all the way around, and then those last little bits we're going to tuck inside the frame as best we can. So bringing those tails up and under and giving them a squeeze so that they won't hurt anybody's skin during wear. And if you can take each one of those individual tails and just bring it forwards through that frame, then all the better. So it's quite a fine little movement, just drawing those through. And we've attached our first piece to the bar. Now, because we were incredibly gentle in creating this piece, you can now ever so slightly move that around. You might want it to come back on itself on the stalk. You might want it to drop a little bit lower down. So that's our second project for this evening. The next one we're going to do, I'm going to take this out of the way for now, bring the whole piece back into position. I'm going to show you how to make this section, which starts with these bubbly bits here and wraps twice around before splaying out into this quite tropical floral display. So that's going to be our project number 3, and project number 3 is probably the one that will take the most amount of time. So I'll move this back out of the way now, and I'll show you the first part of what we're going to make. Now this is basically a modified sumac weave. It's modified for wire work and for using 5 strands. So if I bring that slightly closer, you can see. And I will show you how we create that. I will show you a small section because this can take quite a while to build up. Bring that a little bit closer for a second. And then pop that back down on the board up to one side. So I suggested earlier on that you might like to use a ring clamp this evening. It's not a thing that you absolutely positively have to have. This is mine. I've had it since the dawn of time. It's a screw clamp. Sometimes you will get ones which pivot in the centre and you put a wedge in the other end and it closes this end up for you rather than opening and closing an aperture. So with this modified sumac weave, which we're going to learn how to do in just a second, so on one side it looks different to the other side. I like this side because it looks like barley heads. Move that back out of the way. We're going to take our 5 lengths. Each of these lengths is approximately 7 inches and it is all 18 gauge. I'm just going to give each one of those a quick smooth just to give them a little bit of shine and to make sure that they're super straight. So that's 1 and 2 and 3. I think I did this one earlier, but perhaps not this one. So they really do need to be straight. So if you take a little extra time to make sure that those are straight, then all the better. Now for this project, project number 3, which is the modified sumac weave, we will be using our 26 gauge fine wire, and we're going to use it again from the reel. So if I just pop that down to one side, what I tend to do is start, I'm only going to do maybe 2.5 inches of actual weaving. The rest of this is to connect to our main bar. So what I will do is I will start by wrapping over the top of my base wire all the way around. Let me just add in a second wire, sorry about that. 2 wires side by side, I was looking at it thinking that's not right. So because I'm starting not at the beginning, what I need to do is go around 2 of those wires. So I've come over the top on the left hand side, over the top of the 2 wires together, and then drawing the tail, this is the cut end, down the back and taking that up between base wire, which is number 1, and wire number 2. So I'm going to draw that wire tightly between 1 and 2, push the tail, the cut tail, upwards. I'm going to introduce now base wire number 3, and you can see that these want to work for me because they're beautiful raw copper. And then I'm going to take that tail of wire that's come up between 1 and 2, I'm going to wrap it over the top of both 2 and 3, and draw it down the back, and then bring it up in this position. So on the front I'm wrapping 2 wires together and then coming up again. So if I introduce rod or base wire number 4, I'm going to take the tail of the wire up and over 2 wires, draw it down the back, and then bring it up here between rod number 3 and rod number 4. Pull that into position tightly, take that tail wire all the way up to the top. Introducing the final rod, which is rod or base wire number 5. So I'm going to wrap around 4 and 5 over the top, and then I'm going to come back down now and pop up between 2 and 3, like so. Up again with the tail of the wire, dropping down between 4 and 5. So I'm constantly on the face of the design wrapping 2 wires together. So what we need to do now is come down at the back and pop up between 1 and 2. Excuse me, Mr. Fly. Off you pop. And then draw the wire up and over the surface, and you've probably worked out by now that on the downward stroke we're going to encircle 2 and 3, bring the wire down, all the way down to the base now. Have I gone wrong? I have. I went over the top there. There we go, that's better. So I went down between 3 and 4, all the way down to the base, take the tail of the wire up, and then it comes down between 2 and 3. So basically I'm wrapping 2 wires together at a time on the front, and once I've created one of those little barleys, what I'm going to do is start again. So that's 1 barley done. So I now need to come up between 1 and 2 and continue like this for as long as it takes to fill as much of that wire as I want. It's a labour intensive weave, but it can look really, really beautiful. So I'm just going to show you quickly now. I'm wrapping over the top 2 and 3, coming up between 2 and 3, over the top, coming down between 4 and 5, and then coming up between 3 and 4. Coming up over the top, wrapping 4 and 5, down the back, coming up between 2 and 3. Once you have a go, it's so much easier to understand than it is to explain in a distance class. But I wanted to show you this technique because once you can master something like this with wire, it really gets the creativeness going. So I'm on my second little barley. So what I'm going to do is very, very gently coerce that base wire number 1 to come down. And I'm going to finish off by wrapping, let's have a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what I've got is a really decent, strong point of control for my weave. So I'm going to clip away at the back. You will, when you're making this, want to take much more time over these sections. So if I push these 2 little mountains or little barleys together and very carefully pull the long tail of the wire that's connected to the reel away and just give that a very gentle squeeze, that's going to set my weave into position. Now I'm not going to hang around for too much longer because appreciating this is very repetitive. If I turn this around now the other way, I'm going to show you how to help control your wires if you have a ring clamp already. So my ring clamp is open just enough. What I'm going to do is allow that to sit over the top of the woven section where I've just started. I always forget which way to go. It's righty-tighty, isn't it? So getting that nice and firm, what this can do is it gives you an extra hand. I don't think it was what the ring clamp was designed for, but once your clamp is ensconced upon those wires, you have a much greater opportunity to control these wires without having them sticking in the palm of your hand, which is obviously always much more fun. So you can see in just holding the ring clamp, holding those wires together, you have an opportunity to work with these to make your life easier. So if I take that tail of wire out to the side, working upside down is a slightly trickier way of doing it, but we're just doing the same thing but upside down. So 2 wires at a time, drawing it together, and as you move along you will want those wires to become more tramline like. So you can just splay those ends out if you need to. If I bring that over, I'll just show you what I'm doing. Get that nice and straight. Don't be tempted to pull the wire. You may find that one will slip out of the ring clamp and then that's really sad. So I'm just going to show you very, very quickly, once it's under the control of the ring clamp, how much quicker this weave will make up. They're not expensive items. You can obviously use them for setting gemstones into rings, but all I'm doing at a time is wrapping on the surface of the design 2 wires at a time, return to the bottom. Now once I've done a full barley or a full mountain, I just scooch those up together. I'm bringing this tail wire towards me before I give a very gentle squeeze. Now I am going to cut that off now because we've got so many more things to get on with, but I wanted to show you how to use your ring clamp in wire weaving effectively if you've already got one, and if not, they're really cool things to have, but also how to make that modified sumac weave. So if I pop that out to the side now, what we've got is a section of the modified weave that we've just done, and you can see that this one is upside down to me. If I flick that over, you might be able to see it creates almost a heartbeat trace design on the other side because you have 3 wraps and 1 rather than 2, 2 and 2. So whichever side you want to use, as long as it repeats, it's really beautiful. So the next thing that I did was I added some heat to the ends, the long ends. You'll see that I've got some shorter ends on this side. That's about probably 1.5 inches. 5 or so inches overall. There's around about 1.5 inches again of weaving, maybe slightly more. And then we've got a longer residual tail on this side. So for this section, all I'm going to do is splay these out so that the beads don't interrupt each other overly much. Now you can use whichever beads from the bead pack you want, but to replicate the design I had in mind, I graduated in size from the bottom. You could do this in the exact opposite direction if you wanted to. So I'm going to slide up the smallest of my chosen beads and just put some heat in that little end section there, and what I want to do is trim away some of that wire. Now I've decided which bead is going where. I'm going to support the bead whilst I draw in again those round nose pliers and start coiling at the bottom. Now you could make any kind of stopper for the bead. You can really do whatever you fancy, but I really like these coils, not only because they're fun to make, they're great practice in all elements of wire working, but they do kind of have an organic feel to them, like the tendrils on a vine or something similar. So I'm going to bring in the next couple of beads that I chose just to replicate the design that I made and shared with you earlier on. I adore these beads. They're so sheeny shiny. I don't know what they're called. I'm sure Sarah or Danielle will be able to tell me, but I absolutely love them. I'm wearing my one from Shark Week with those gorgeous blue tone shiny beads, which is what I'm going to refer to them now. So again, round nose pliers, bringing that into the end of the round wire after I've added my bead into position and just starting a coil up. You can make them as open, as closed, as matching, as different as you like. I'm just going to do this really quite quickly now because you don't want to see the same thing over and over again. Each time I'm adding on a bead, I'm just gently heating the wire to make sure there's enough flexibility in it for that bead to go on super safely. So let me just slide that one into position. I don't think I need to trim overly much off because I've allowed enough wire on the ends here so that I can set those beads into position. So let's grab the end of that wire just there and start coiling. And I'll show you a different way to coil up on the other end once we've added this to the main bar design. So we're going to spin that around. That's a slightly more open coil, but I'm not overly going to let it worry me. They're going to kind of cascade in a slightly more straight line, and once they come down, that will be the design as it looks on the main section. So again, a little bit of heat into that wire each time you add a bead. It's new wire each time you're doing this, so there's nothing really to be concerned about. I think I can probably take a tiny amount off the end there. And the only reason I'm trimming is to try and make these coils look reasonably similarly sized. They don't have to be identical, of course, but I like the aesthetic. You can make them all different if you want to. You can even add teeny tiny beads in a bit later on. There are some tidgy beads in this mix, which I don't think is actually a word, but you can also add one of the smaller beads into the centre of the coil if you want to. One of the benefits of warming the wire before you add that bead is if your coil goes a little bit too far and you need to uncoil it, then it will do that for you. If you're constantly brutally working with cold wire, then what can happen is that it gets a little bit stroppy with you and it doesn't particularly want to do what you're asking it to do. So again, I just need to take a tiny amount off the end there, and then I will do my last coil and we'll move back to the bar of our bar necklace floral design. So again, another coil on the end. Honestly, you must get bored of coils, but they're so very functional and can be super pretty, so it's one worth mastering. So I think I've probably taken that just a little bit short, so because we warmed it, you can see that there is the opportunity to bring that back down a little bit. Now, this particular piece that adds on to the main necklace design actually is a coverer of sins. So this little design that I've created here, which we'll get to at the end of tonight possibly, I didn't like how the end piece looked attached to my bar. So if I bring the bar back in for a second, I'd made this funny little bead cluster and I'd popped it on and I'd popped it on and I'd rejigged it and I'd rejigged it, and I didn't like how it looked, so I was planning on showing you this modified sumac anyway, but it was a bit of a boon because it covered up the bit that I wasn't pleased with. So we'll save that to show you how to cover up something that you might not particularly want to make the whole thing again. So there's always a rescue with wirework, and that's 99% of why there are coils in wirework designs, which is always good. So we're going to move on now to the Feeling Rosy bead design. And we'll talk about how to create that effect, which is so easy, it's just untrue. That's our next little mini tutorial. I'm going to pop these pieces up and out of the way, and we will come back to them in just a moment. So I think this is Feeling Rosy in golden. Rose gold would also work really beautifully with this particular piece, but these are just so incredibly beautiful and really, really delicate and detailed. So for this we have a core wire which is made of the 18 gauge. Let me just move my pliers, and it's around about 6 inches or so. And to create the small coil which we're going to be using, if you have a gizmo, you will know how to make those already, and you only need about probably just over ½ an inch worth of solid coil, and to create that I was using the 22 gauge wire. So I have, that's not 22 gauge, where's my 22? There it is. Do you know what, I think you could do this in 24 as well, but we're going to try the 22 for now. And I think that will be the nicest feel to it. So 22 or 24 gauge, even 20 gauge would work. And what I would do is work with this off the reel. Now you can make your small coil with, I'll show you very quickly how to do it with round nose pliers, because not everybody has bail makers. So if you choose a point on your round nose pliers, and if you start making a coil, and what you'll see is that the end of that wire is heading towards the tapered point of my round nose pliers. And what I do is I move those round nose pliers very, very gently, and the leading edge here of the wire that's attached to the reel is staying on the same point of those round nose pliers, and the coil that you generate moves down and away. Now, it's not the perfect way to make coils, that's your gizmo, but you can see when you get going and you get into the swing of it, the first bit's a bit scrappy, but you can always just cut that away. It does start to look reasonably nice, so in a pinch I will make a coil on round nose pliers. I'm going to get this out of the way and show you now with bail making pliers. These are the Beadalon 6-stage stepped bail making pliers. Now I like number 2 for this, because it's a little bit easier than using your round nose pliers. I'm just going to loosen off some of that 22, yes, it's 22 gauge. I lost myself for a moment then. I'm going to pinch that to begin with, and we're doing almost the exact same movement as we did with those round nose pliers, but the benefit is that there's no possibility of that size of the coil varying in any way. So just half turns builds the coil reasonably quickly, and because you're open, close, open, close, open, close, now you're not going to be heavy-handed with this because you'll mark the coil, but being reasonably gentle with it, even being gentle with it and opening and closing repeatedly, gives you a little extra residual strength on that coil. So I'm just going to cut that away, making sure that it's not your fingers that you cut and it's just the wire. I need to put this back for later, so excuse my arm going across the camera for a second there. It's all gone a bit floopy. So I made this coil earlier on, and that's plenty long enough. It's just over ½ an inch. And what we're going to do is open it out, and it just gives you a spring-like effect, which is really useful in wire work for covering space. So I'm going to put my nails in the ends and just open that out gently. If you do accidentally splay the end open, not to worry, you've got enough coils for it not to be a massive problem. So very, very gently, little by little, and I'll show you with one of the smaller pieces I made some of the pitfalls if you don't go gently. So what I'm trying to do here is open it out evenly so you have a fairly good and repeated space between each of those coils. So if I just pop that down for now, I'll grab the tiny coil that we made on the bail makers, and I'll just grip each end and I'll go like so. You can obviously overextend that, which is a bit of a disaster. That's not what we wanted. And then the section that we made with the round nose pliers, you can open it out sometimes, and what will happen is it'll open more at one end, and then you need to just kind of take a little extra time. If you go too far, it's really quite tricky to get that to spring up again, so that might be a little bit of a fail, but we've got one to work with. So again, in the same way as we did for the very first of the tutorials, sorry, my wire's just trying to get in on the act there, what we're going to do is to create, can you see up there? There's a coil on the end of that 18 gauge wire that fits through the beautiful feeling rosy bead. So we'll create that coil first, and then we'll post the opposite end through the centre of that bead. So you can make a single or a double coil, or you can do 1.5, you can do whatever makes you happy. The key is this end section, it needs to be strong and large enough to support not fitting back through the gaps in the beads. So I'm going to make this exactly the same way as I did at the very first of our tutorials tonight, and I'm going to draw that wire over, and if that was a little bit fine for you to see earlier, then this heavier wire will certainly help with the aspect of design from earlier. So again, I'm going to push that down by hand, give that a really firm hand pinch to set that into position, and then I'm going to support very, very gently halfway across the centre, and I'll show you now. You can either lift the wire up or you can turn the pliers away, and what you've ended up with is a coil disc head pin. Now this is a really substantial piece to work with. So with any of the open beads from Jessie James, you just need to make sure that you're going through the centre. The captured crystals work in a very similar way. There's more than one aperture, so just line that up to make yourself happy. And then you can play around with how the disc sits on the end if you want. Just get that to nestle in on the end of that rosy bead. If you wanted to do this a different way, then you can go for quite a much smaller disc. What I'm going to do is just give that a quick pinch and then draw that back on. That makes me much happier. So what we will do here is add that opened coil that we created from the 22 gauge wire and pop that on. So you've got really quite an interesting little bit of stem work. Now we're going to pop this again to one side, and we will use that at the end of the evening to draw all of those pieces together. We'll just add it in. Now, one of my very favourite things to do, just pop that out of the way and bring the other side down, is to create vine work. This is a tutorial that I came up with a few years ago to create a strand of, they could be flower buds, they could be leaves, they can really be whatever you want them to be. Look a little bit like rosebud heads that are yet to open just here. But I like adding beads into these, and I'm going to show you this technique. Now, if all you wanted to do was sit and create vine work, I have actually made these bar necklaces with just vine work before, but layer upon layer of it with different coloured beads. So it's a lovely process to learn to make. It's also really useful again for covering up things. Maybe you've got a bare patch and you just need something a little bit quick to go in. So we're going to learn how to do the vine work now, which is project number 5. So I pop that back up out at the top there. I'm working now with the 20 gauge wire, so it's substantial but not heavy, and I have around about 12 inches, and we'll see how much that makes down to. So I'm going to just straighten that out and warm it through, and just ensure that that's nice and straight and glossy. Just while I'm here, let me pop back up to you for a second. Just while I've got you for a moment, before we carry on with the vine work, I can't see any of the comments in the feed at the moment, but what I promise that I will do is I will go into Facebook immediately after the live has ended, and I'll check in with you. If there are any questions at all, I'll do absolutely my best to help you overcome any issues that you might have, or any requests for future tutorials. Do let me know. I can't see the comments at the moment, but I want to thank you for hanging out with us, and I will catch up with you on the comments in just a tick. So I'm going to put you back to here, because I don't really think you need to see the back of my head down here when I'm concentrating on things, so we'll go there. I'm just showing off that I've learned a thing, that's all it is. So I've got my 12 inches of that 20 gauge, this is round raw copper wire, and I'm going to start by smoothing that around about 1.5 inches from the end. I'm going to bring in my bent chain nose pliers, put a really sharp, firm, right angle bend in there. So I'm going to use the shape of my thumb to bring that up into whatever design you want to use. And you can see I used the thumb to create the bulge, and then just used the finger to create a more pointed effect on the end. So once I've got that little pointed effect, what I'm going to do is come underneath with those bent chain nose pliers, draw the wire back around on itself, so it's travelling back the way it came. Now I'm going to support the end where we've just made that little sharper shape, and just, if you've warmed the wire, what you can do is ask it to waggle around just a gentle bit to try and get whatever shape makes you happy. Now you might want symmetry, you might not, I don't know, but once you've got a leaf or a flower shape that you particularly like, pinch that really firmly, and what we're going to do is take that tail all the way around underneath and back around, coiling around the ongoing body of wire that we have. So I'm going to give that a pinch just to get that nice and tight. Now, one of the pitfalls of this design, if you don't pinch hard enough here, as you're turning this coil around the central core of wire, this side of your rosebud or petal or flower, whatever it is, will disappear. So you need to pinch that very, very firmly. Your alternative is to grab another pair of pliers and grip firmly very close to the end there. Now I always get a little bit nervous when I'm using 2 pairs of pliers because I can't feel everything that's happening. You get a lot of feedback in wire when you're using your hands to do part of the job. When you're using 2 pairs of pliers, it's almost like you're slightly removed. So I'm just showing you this as one way to do the job, which may be better for you. Maybe there's dexterity issues or strength issues, whatever works best for you. In wire work, you can become fatigued very easily. So anything that you can choose to do which makes your life less fatiguing, you'll have a longer career in wire work jewellery. So what I've done here is I've just tightened that coil up a little bit. I'm going to show you a trick to make your petals and flowers in vine work a little bit more 3D. So I'm going to pinch very firmly that coil I just made. What I'm going to do is draw the petal up towards me around 1/3 of the way along, and then I'm going to go 2/3 of the way along and drop it down, and then right at the very end I'm bringing that back up again. Now it might not look like much, but if I tilt that sideways you can see we've got a lot more dynamic movement in that wire in really just 3 very, very quick manoeuvres. So what we need to do now is just smooth a couple of times, not too many, and what we're going to do is introduce a bead onto the other end of our wire. So I'm going to push one of these almost kind of turquoise faceted rondelles down into position. Now when you're working with beads in wire, you always need to be respectful. We don't want to put too much pressure on any point where the bead is being pushed up against more wire. So what I will do is I will put my pliers in underneath. I'm not touching the bead. There is a tiny, tiny, like 5 microns of space between the bead and the pliers, and I'm going to turn a very sharp upright bend. Now you can see that that's left a really nice gap between the bend in the wire, which actually isn't very sharp, but that's fine. You can make it sharp if you want to. If you wanted to, you could just kind of take that a couple of times, give it a waggle and make it sharper, but I'm happy with it as it is. So once we've got that right angle, we're going to come away from the main stem of our vine, and what I'm going to do is turn another right angle back towards our starting point. So I'm going to turn this now through 90 degrees and repeat that petal or leaf or rosebud shape that we started off with. Popping those pliers in underneath the very, very end, push that back around like so, pinch hold of that very, very end section so you can replicate the shape and draw it back around. So for this I tend to use pliers and hands for the next section. What I'm going to do is grip that leaf shape. Now I am never pressing down where one wire crosses another. I'm gripping the leaf shape. What I'm going to do, this might make scratchy noises, is draw the tail of wire around once and twice, and I'm applying a great deal of pressure with my hand on that side now, and that's going to stop the wire from eating up all the length down one side of the leaf like so. I think we'll probably get one more turn in there, being very respectful of our bead. We don't want to smash it. Drawing that wire down the little gap, and then your long tail of wire continues to be the stem of our vine work. So once or twice again to give that a little bit of warmth. If you want to add that dynamism, you can certainly put some bends in there if you wish to. I have actually smashed that ever so slightly, which is a shame, but never mind, it'll all be fine when the end of the night comes too. So I'm going to introduce now another bead onto the end, the long end. Pop that down in as we go. This time we're going to turn in the opposite direction, so again being mindful that we're not scratching those beads or putting any undue pressure on them. We start with a right angle, move the vine around, and we have another right angle going back towards the starting point. Now you just have to do it opposite-handed, so left-handed instead of right-handed, which if you are left-handed, I don't know if this is helpful or not. We're creating that leaf shape with a kind of a point at the tip there. Turn that around from underneath with the tip of the pliers. Pull that sharply back towards you. A little bit of a point on the end there. I'm going to grip hold of the tip of that leaf shape or petal shape and draw that around. Now you can go over or under, as long as you do the same thing each time. It looks really nice. If you get mixed up and you do one under and one over, nobody is going to care. They really aren't. It's really pretty. So grip again really firmly, just the leaf shape, not the crossover point, and we're going to take that tail all the way around, once and twice, as many times as it takes to fill that space. So we did 3 times on the first one, so I might try and replicate that just by tightening up a little bit. One more turn around, and then the tail of wire, the long tail of wire, goes along and it becomes the strand or the stem of our vine work. So you would just continue in exactly the same way. Again, if you want to add some dimension, dynamics to the leaf, you can give it a little bit of a movement like so, and you can see already we're halfway, we're over halfway our 12 inches of wire, and we've just got those 3 petals, so 12 inches should give you the 5 petals or so to replicate the piece that we had on the main design. So if I just pop that down now, we've made our little trio of flowers, we've made our rosy bead, we've made our modified sumac weave, and we've made our vine work. Now we don't have very much time to go, so I'm going to leave this one for another day. You can simply recreate the trio if you want to. What I want to show you now is how to bring it all together. So if I slide that one up out of the way, and bring back in the bar where we started, what we're going to do is add in each of those components wherever it makes me happy. So you can have the rosy bead coming up, you can have it dropping down and around, really whatever makes you happy, whatever you think is aesthetically pleasing. Now I've got the 18 gauge wire on this section. I've probably got a little bit more than I actually need for a nice secure connection, so I'm just going to trim a little bit away. Now, when you're working with that single wire, you can either go over the top of the 2 bars, or you can have it hanging slightly further down. So I'm going to thread that so that it hangs from beneath. Actually, do you know what would be cool? Is if we were to put a little bend in that, we could have this as a hanging feature instead. So if you want to add this on, you can do it in exactly the same way as our first project, which is just wrapping around and tidying the tail away. But what I fancy doing is just having this as a dangling charm instead. So I'm going to create an open loop. If you wanted to create this as a wrapped loop, you absolutely can. So I will use my bail makers as I've got them right here. I'm going to turn that all the way around so that we get that circular form. I'm going to trim away that excess. This would be quite fun actually, to have something more mobile on the finished piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is to set my open loop. Then I know that some people refuse to use open loops, and I respect that. If I wasn't demonstrating this live and I was making this for a commission, this would 100% be a wrapped loop. But because, for the sake of expediency and for the sake of changing your mind halfway through, I'm setting really, really firmly. I'm opening and closing on that the open loop several times, giving it a squash, and then I'm going to open that like a jump ring, so sideways, and I'm just going to loop that into the design before closing that loop up. So give that a squish, making sure that there's no gaps, and we'll have a look and see how that is. I think that's really cute. You may want to add it exactly the same way. You can see here all I've done is I've wrapped around exactly the same way as the trio of flowers, and then just put a little coil on the end, because why wouldn't you? If you've got some spare wire, that's what we tend to do. So we are going to add our little bit of vine work very, very last, I think. For now, I will show you how to add on the modified sumac. Now this you will need to warm. If you have hot fingers like I do, it won't be a problem. You can just hold it. You can stroke the empty wires on the end a little bit. Just pop some warmth into it. And imagine we'd really made a horrible botch of adding on our trio of flowers. If we really have botched that, we might want to cover that up. So I'm going to lay this modified sumac over the top. I'm going to press down firmly, and because we've warmed that, this should work. I'm going to take that tail around, it takes a little bit of effort, and have it fit and form. and I'm going to bring that up the other side. Now you may find it quite challenging because of the weight of the wire. I'm going to bring that up like so, and let's pop that back down. So that's an open wrap. It's quite loose. So what you'll need to do is just mess with that until it sits exactly how you want it to sit. I mean, you could open these up, do exactly whatever you want with them. It's your design after all, so you can kind of bring that one over the top if you want to. There's lots of ways that you can personalise it. Now, we talked earlier about different things that you can do with coils. If you are not going to be wearing this with a lacy shawl, then one of the cool things you can do, if I can just grab my round nose pliers, is make a coil that stems upwards and away. It gives a really beautiful tendril-like 3D effect. I'm going to show you one with round nose pliers and one with bail making pliers. So if I start twisting a coil, but instead of keeping it all flat on the same plane, I'm just going to allow that to come up and away. I mean, you could, if you have one of the, I can't remember what they're called, little jigs for making this kind of shape, then you could absolutely use those. But I really like making these. If you're wearing a lacy shawl, that's not going to work. It's going to ping onto things. But you can kind of play around with that. What I would say, though, is that very, very end coil, once you've got the shape, just close that up so that you don't actually have a sticky outy bit. You can just have lots of fun with dimensional jewelleries, because that comes forwards quite a lot. Now if I grab the bail makers, we'll go for the smallest, I think, and we'll try and, if I just get those out of the way for a second, we'll try and make quite a tight little coil to begin with, and then we'll spring it open like we did with one of the techniques earlier where we created a spring. So I'm creating a spring shape to begin with. Got my bail maker stuck in there, which is always good. And then you can prise that open and just draw it up and out and have tendrils, because some flowers do have kind of bits coming away. So you can open that out to be something a little bit more exciting. But again, once you've got that open to the kind of shape that you want it to be in, make sure that that last section is a closed loop, and then there's less impact. You still wouldn't want to wear it with a lacy shawl. So those other three would be done in exactly the same technique. What we're going to do is just now add on the vine work. So I've only got 3 petals and 2 beads in this piece, so what I'll do is I'll add one last bead. I'll show you how to finish off the section. Obviously, if you want to make that longer, you absolutely can. I tend to go one side and the other side. You can have them all on the one side if you want to. So a right angle, and then another right angle coming back towards the very first piece that you made. And then we're going to make that petal or rosebud shape. Draw that around into a bit of a point, and then push the wire back round, and then we're going to finish off with a wrapped loop around that arm. Now, because you've got a bit of a job to do, you might want to just open that out slightly like I've just done there. Pinch really firmly, take the tail all the way around, and we'll go for those 3 wraps again, and then trim away underneath like so. Get that tidied up, and then just to finish off your vine work, what you can do, and if you're really canny, you can have the same number of leaves on either side, is just draw that around so that it's endless, it's floral all the way along. Now we're going to pinch a little bit of scrap 26 gauge wire for this last section, and I'm only using about 6 inches, it doesn't take much. What we will do is just add this on to anywhere that we haven't got anything exciting going on. So for this, what I will do is I'll start halfway along where I want my vine work to sit. I'm going to post my small section of 26 gauge, and what I'll do is I'll wrap that maybe 3 times around just one side of our initial bar. So 1, 2 and 3. Make sure that that is a nice tight fit, because all we're going to do now is just sew this into position. So I quite like the idea of it being at a slightly jaunty angle. And all I'm going to do is just take the wire where it can find grip and purchase. I'm wrapping it twice around the vine work and then drawing the tail back down and adding it to that frame where we started at the beginning. So post that up and through. Once you've got a really good grip to begin with, you can reduce it to 2 or you can add it up to 3 wraps each time if you prefer. And you only really need about 3 or 4 purchase points along that section just to ensure that it's safely there forever. When you get to the end of your project, just need to find a place to really cast off, or you know, when you're sewing, you're fixing things and you go through the same bit of thread a couple of times, through the same bit of fabric a couple of times, just to ensure that it bites and it stays. That's what we're doing here. So I would find a place on one of those bars of the initial main open weave bar that is our nuts and bolts section, and I will wrap at least 3 times around there. Now if things get tricky for you, you can always pull that through with your pliers. You can make a little bit of a needle, as it were, push that through for the last time, and then pull that out from underneath. So I'm going to leave that end because I'll finish that off later, and flip over and just trim away that last excess of wire. One of the worst things you can do in wire work is cut the wrong wire. So look twice and cut once. And I will just pop that down. So here's our incredibly different modified floral bar necklace. I'm going to bring in the original piece now. We've done pretty much all of the techniques tonight. We showed you how to make these little wrapped loops on the end into which you can add the absolutely gorgeous chain reaction chain. I think it matches really well. I love mixing silver tones, gold tones and bronze or copper tones all in one. So I'm just going to bring you to here. As I said before, what I will do is I'll pop down, after I've finished broadcasting, I'll pop down into the comments and I'll try to answer any queries or questions you might have. If you do have any requests for future lives or tutorials, please do just drop me a message, either care of this thread that we've had today, this evening, or you can pop over to my Facebook page or catch up with me somehow, some way, and I'll do my best to accommodate any requests. Obviously I can't send you £1,000,000 because I don't have that, but you know, we can do our best. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's tutorial for the floral bar necklace. I'm going to leave that image up there because it's prettier than my mug is anyway, so I look forward to coming back and seeing you again very, very soon. I should be with you, all things being equal, Thursday of next week at the same time. Have a beautiful day. I guess it's just after 5 Eastern Standard. It's 10 o'clock here in the UK, so I'm going to go and have a bevy and catch up with your comments. Have a beautiful time, take care, and I'll see you soon.